Life often takes us through seasons where we feel like we are wandering without direction. We pray, we wait, we hope, but nothing seems to change. The answers don't come, the breakthrough seems distant, and we begin to wonder if God is really at work. But here's the truth. God's timing is not like ours. He sees what we cannot see. He moves in ways we do not understand, and when the time is right, He will align everything perfectly. What looks like waiting is actually preparation. What feels like a delay is actually divine timing. Think about a seed planted in the ground. When a farmer plants a seed, he does not expect an immediate harvest. He knows that growth takes time. First, the seed must break open beneath the soil, where no one can see what is happening. For a while, it seems like nothing is changing. The surface remains the same, but underground, in the unseen, the seed is transforming. Roots are forming. Strength is being built, and then, at the right time, when the conditions are perfect, the seed pushes through the soil and begins to grow. This is how God works in our lives. He plants dreams, promises, and callings within us, and then He takes us through a process of growth, a process that often feels like waiting, but just because you cannot see immediate results does not mean that nothing is happening. God is working in the unseen. He is developing you, strengthening you, preparing you for what's ahead. The waiting season is never wasted. It is where God shapes you. It is where He deepens your faith, refines your character, and gets you ready for the doors He is about to open. Look at the life of Abraham. God gave him a promise that he would be the father of many nations, but years passed and nothing seemed to happen. He and his wife Sarah were growing old, and in the natural it looked impossible. But God was not in a hurry. He was working according to His perfect timing. When Sarah finally gave birth to Isaac, it was not just another child being born, it was a fulfillment of a divine promise at the exact time God had ordained. If Abraham had received the promise too soon, he would not have been ready to carry the responsibility of it. Sometimes we want things to happen instantly. We want success overnight. We want to step into our calling without the process. But God's plan is different. He knows that if He gives us something too soon, we may not be able to handle it. That is why He takes us through seasons of waiting, to strengthen us, to prepare us, to develop the faith and character we need for what is coming. Consider Joseph. God gave him dreams of greatness when he was young, but before those dreams came to pass, Joseph had to go through years of waiting and testing. He was sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. From the outside, it seemed like God had forgotten about him, but God was not ignoring him. He was preparing him. Every challenge Joseph faced was shaping him into the leader he was meant to be. And when the time was right, God lifted him from the prison to the palace in a single moment. That is how God works. He may take years to prepare you, but when the right time comes, He can change everything in an instant. The waiting is not a punishment. It is a process. It is where God builds endurance, where He refines your faith, where He teaches you to trust Him fully. If you rush the process, you may step into something before you are ready, but if you allow God to do His work in you, when the door finally opens, you will be fully prepared to walk through it. Think about David. He was anointed as king when he was still a shepherd boy, but he did not step into the throne immediately. He had to go through years of training, of battles, of learning to depend on God. He faced rejection, opposition, and hardship, but all of it was necessary. If David had become king too soon, he would not have been the leader that God had destined him to be. Every delay had a purpose. Every battle was preparing him for the throne. And the same is true for you. The waiting season you are in is not a mistake. It is not wasted time. God is using this time to prepare you for something greater. He is aligning things in your favor, setting up the right connections, shaping your heart, and getting everything in place. The doors you are waiting for will open, but they will open at the right time. If you trust Him, if you remain faithful in the process, you will see that His timing is always perfect. It is easy to grow impatient, to wonder why things are taking so long. But remember, God sees the whole picture. He knows when you are ready. He knows when the conditions are right. And when the appointed time comes, nothing will be able to stop what He has planned for you. So do not be discouraged in the waiting. Keep trusting, keep believing, keep preparing yourself. When God's timing aligns, everything will fall into place in ways you never expected. The breakthrough will come, the promise will be fulfilled, and you will look back and realize that every moment of waiting was worth it, because God's plan was far greater than anything you could have imagined. There are moments in life when everything seems to be falling apart. You make plans, set goals, and work hard, but then suddenly, things don't go as expected. A door that you thought would open remains shut. An opportunity you were counting on disappears. A relationship you believed in crumbles. In those moments, it's easy to feel discouraged, to wonder if you've made a mistake, or to believe that maybe God isn't with you. But what if I told you that the obstacles you are facing are not roadblocks, but rather divine setups? What if the very thing that seems to be against you is actually part of God's greater plan? Many times, we see obstacles as signs that we are on the wrong path. We think that if something is difficult, it must not be meant for us. But the truth is, God often uses obstacles to redirect, refine, and prepare us. What looks like a delay is sometimes God's way of setting things in order. What feels like rejection is often protection. What seems like failure is actually a step towards something better. Consider the story of Moses and the Israelites. When they left Egypt, they thought they were free. But then they found themselves trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army. From a human perspective, it looked like the end. There was no way forward and no way back. The people panicked, thinking that God had abandoned them. But what they didn't see was that God had placed them in that exact position for a reason. He was about to do something miraculous. He was about to part the sea and make a way where there was no way. The same is true in your life. Sometimes God will allow you to reach a place where you feel stuck, not to punish you, but to reveal His power. He allows obstacles so that when He makes a way, you will know without a doubt that it was Him. If the road was always easy, if there were never any challenges, you might think you accomplished things on your own. But when you face impossible situations and God steps in, your faith is strengthened and His glory is revealed. Look at David's life. Before he became king, he faced countless obstacles. He was overlooked by his own family, hunted by King Saul, and forced to live in caves. There were times when it looked like he would never fulfill his destiny. But every obstacle was part of God's plan. Every challenge prepared him for his calling. If David had not faced Goliath, he would not have stepped into the spotlight. If he had not been pursued by Saul, he would not have developed the leadership skills needed to be king. The obstacles were not there to stop him, they were there to prepare him. In the same way, the obstacles you are facing today are not there to defeat you, they are there to build you. They are there to teach you to rely on God, to strengthen your faith, and to prepare you for what's ahead. You may not understand why things are so difficult right now. You may feel like giving up. But if you could see what God is doing behind the scenes, you would realize that this struggle is temporary. The very thing that seems to be holding you back is actually setting you up for something greater. Sometimes God allows obstacles to test our faith. Will we trust Him even when things don't make sense? Will we keep moving forward even when the way is unclear? The enemy wants you to believe that obstacles mean you are alone, that God has forgotten you, that your dreams will never come to pass. But that is a lie. The presence of obstacles does not mean the absence of God. In fact, it often means the opposite. He is working in ways you cannot see. Think about Joseph. He had a dream that one day he would be a great leader. But instead of immediately stepping into that promise, he faced a series of obstacles: betrayal by his brothers, slavery, false accusations, imprisonment. From the outside, it looked like everything was going wrong. But in reality, everything was going exactly as God had planned. Each obstacle was leading Joseph closer to his destiny. If he had not been sold into slavery, he would not have ended up in Egypt. If he had not been falsely accused, he would not have been in the right place to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And if he had not interpreted Pharaoh's dream, he would not have been promoted to a position of power. What looked like setbacks were actually set up. That is how God works. He takes what the enemy meant for harm and turns it for good. He allows obstacles not to destroy you, but to develop you. The hardship you are facing right now is not the end of your story. It is just a chapter in a much bigger plan. If you stay faithful, if you refuse to give up, you will see how every difficulty was actually leading you to something greater. God's timing is perfect. This is something we hear often, but truly understanding and trusting it is one of the greatest challenges of faith. As human beings, we live in a world that demands quick results. We want success now, answers now, breakthroughs now. Waiting is uncomfortable. It makes us feel uncertain and restless. But God does not operate on our timeline. His ways are higher than our ways, and His understanding is beyond ours. What may seem like a delay to us is actually divine timing at work. Think about how time feels when you are waiting for something important. Maybe you are waiting for a job opportunity, a financial breakthrough, a relationship to be restored, or a dream to come to pass. The longer it takes, the more doubt creeps in. You start to wonder if God has forgotten about you. You question if you did something wrong. But what you must understand is that waiting is not wasted time. In God's kingdom, waiting is preparation. He is aligning everything at the right moment, in the right season, to bring about the best outcome for your life. One of the greatest examples of God's perfect timing is found in the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a son, yet years went by and nothing happened. They grew older, and from a human perspective it seemed impossible. They tried to take matters into their own hands, and that only led to unnecessary struggles. But when the time was right, when God had prepared them, when the circumstances aligned, and when their faith had been tested, Isaac was born. If they had received the promise too soon, they wouldn't have been ready to steward it well. God's timing ensured that the blessing came when it would fulfill His divine purpose. The same principle applies to your life. What you are waiting for is not being denied, it is being developed. God is working in ways you cannot see. He is moving people, changing circumstances, and preparing you for what He has in store. If you receive something too soon, it may overwhelm you or cause you to rely on your own strength instead of His guidance. Sometimes God withholds something not as a punishment, but as protection. He knows when the timing is right. And when that moment comes, no force in the world can stop His plan. Look at Joseph's journey. He had dreams of leadership and greatness, yet he found himself in slavery and prison for years. From the outside, it seemed like God's promise was delayed, but in reality, every step was preparing Joseph for his destiny. The skills he learned in Potiphar's house, the lessons he gained in prison, and the humility he developed through suffering, all of it positioned him for the right moment. When the time came, in just one day, Joseph went from being a prisoner to ruling Egypt. Imagine if he had been promoted before he was ready. The weight of leadership might have crushed him, but God's timing ensured he was not just elevated, but equipped to handle the blessing. You may feel like you are in a season of waiting, but do not mistake God's silence for his absence. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean he isn't working. The roots of a tree grow deep before the branches ever appear. Likewise, God is doing something deep in your spirit, preparing you for what is ahead. If you rush the process, you may step into something you are not ready to handle. Waiting on God's timing also builds trust. When things happen too quickly, we often take credit for them. We think it was our efforts, our intelligence, or our connections that made it happen. But when we wait on God, we recognize that it is His hand at work. We learn to rely on Him completely. This is why some of the greatest blessings come after long seasons of waiting. Those who wait on the Lord renew their strength. They come out stronger, wiser, and more prepared than ever before. God's timing is also about aligning circumstances. He is not just preparing you, He is preparing everything around you. Sometimes the delay is because the people you need to connect with are not ready yet. The doors that need to open are still being set in place. You may be ready, but the situation God is calling you into is not yet fully developed. Instead of seeing waiting as a delay, see it as divine alignment. Many people give up right before their breakthrough. They stop believing because they think the delay means the promise is no longer valid. But God does not forget what He has spoken over your life. If He said it, He will bring it to pass. The timing is just as important as the promise itself. There are moments in life when we stand at a crossroads, unsure of what lies ahead. We long for clarity, for a clear sign that we are on the right path. We wonder if we are making the right decisions, if we are stepping into God's plan or just moving forward on our own. But here is the truth. When God has a plan for your life, He will guide you, even when you cannot see the full picture. His direction is not always revealed in one grand moment. Often, it unfolds step by step, one small move at a time, requiring faith, trust, and obedience. When you surrender to God's plan, you may not always understand where He is leading you, but you can trust that He is leading you somewhere good. Imagine a traveler walking through thick fog. They cannot see the whole path ahead, but they can see the next step. They trust that as they move forward, more of the path will become visible. This is how God guides us. He does not always show us the full destination, but He gives us enough light for the next step. And as we take that step in faith, He reveals more. Think about Moses. When God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, He did not give him a complete roadmap. He simply told him to go, to trust, and to follow His leading. At every stage, God provided direction, whether through signs, miracles, or His voice. But Moses had to take the first step in faith. He had to stand before Pharaoh without knowing how it would all unfold. He had to lead the people through the wilderness, trusting that God would provide. And each time Moses followed God's direction, the path became clearer. Many times, we hesitate to move forward because we want certainty. We want to know the full picture before we take the first step. But God calls us to trust Him beyond what we can see. He calls us to obedience, even when we do not have all the answers. If we wait until everything makes perfect sense, we may never move. But if we trust Him and take the step He is leading us to take, we will find that His guidance is always there, just as He promised. Consider Peter. When Jesus called him to walk on water, Peter did not have a logical plan. The laws of nature told him that stepping out of the boat was impossible, but Jesus said, "Come," and in that moment Peter had a choice: stay in the boat where it was safe, or step out in faith. He chose to step out. And as long as his focus remained on Jesus, he walked on water. The moment he doubted, he began to sink, but even then, Jesus reached out and saved him. This is how God's guidance works. He calls us to take bold steps, to trust Him, to keep our eyes on Him. And even if we stumble, He will always be there to lift us up. God's plan often requires us to step into the unknown. Abraham was called to leave his homeland without knowing where he was going. The disciples were called to follow Jesus, leaving behind everything they knew. Paul was called to preach to the Gentiles, stepping into unfamiliar places. None of them had all the answers before they obeyed, but because they followed God's leading, they walked into a destiny greater than they could have imagined. You may be at a place in life where you are unsure of what to do next. Maybe you have been praying for direction, waiting for a clear sign, but God is asking you to trust Him. His guidance may not come as a loud voice or a flashing light. It may come as a quiet prompting in your heart, a small open door, an unexpected opportunity. And when you feel that nudge, do not ignore it. Do not wait until you have all the details figured out. Move forward in faith, knowing that if God is leading you, He will not let you fall. One of the most powerful ways God guides us is through peace. When you are walking in His will, even if the path is uncertain, there is an unexplainable peace in your heart. This peace does not mean the journey will be easy. It does not mean you will not face challenges. But it means that deep down, you know you are where you are supposed to be. If you feel restless, if you sense that something is not right, pay attention to that. God often speaks through the peace He gives, or withholds. What if I told you that your life is already written in the heart of God, that no matter what you're facing right now, disappointments, delays, or detours, God has a plan so powerful that it will change everything? See, the problem is that most of us try to figure life out on our own. We chase after what we think is best, but we miss the fact that God already has the perfect blueprint for us. You might feel lost. You might feel like you've made too many mistakes, but let me tell you something. God's plan is bigger than your past, greater than your failures, and stronger than any obstacle. And once you understand it, once you align with it, everything shifts. The weight you've been carrying, it lifts. The fear, it fades. And the path ahead, it becomes clearer than ever before. Today, I want to take you deeper into this truth. God's plan for you is unshakable, unstoppable, and undeniable. And when you truly grasp this, this changes everything. God's plan is bigger than you think. That statement alone should shift the way you look at your life. Too often we confine our expectations to what we can see, touch, and understand. We measure possibilities by our abilities, resources, and circumstances. But God's plan for you is not limited by what you can comprehend. His vision stretches far beyond the boundaries of human understanding. What you see as the ceiling of your potential is just the floor of what He has in store for you. Think about Joseph in the Bible. He was given a dream that one day he would be a ruler, yet his life seemed to go in the opposite direction. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and thrown into prison, nothing about his life made sense in the moment. But what Joseph didn't know was that every painful event was leading him to a greater purpose. What seemed like obstacles were actually stepping stones. The betrayal that sent him to Egypt positioned him to become second in command of the entire nation. If Joseph had judged his life by what he could see, he would have given up. But God's plan was bigger than Joseph's understanding. You may feel like you're stuck in a season of difficulty. You may be wondering why doors are closing, why certain relationships ended, or why you're facing so many challenges. But God sees the bigger picture. You might only see a few pieces of the puzzle, but He sees the completed masterpiece. The very things that feel like setbacks could be the key to unlocking your destiny. You may think you've lost an opportunity, but God is preparing something better. Sometimes God's plan looks nothing like what we expect. That's because He is not confined to human limitations. When He called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses didn't feel qualified. He saw his own weaknesses, his inability to speak fluently, his past mistakes, but God saw a deliverer. God sees beyond your insecurities. He sees beyond your failures. He sees the potential inside you that you don't even recognize. He calls you based on who He created you to be, not on where you are right now. When David was anointed as king, he wasn't even considered worthy enough to be in the lineup. His own father didn't believe he was the one. But God's plan was bigger than what others thought. David wasn't crowned king immediately. He had to go through years of preparation, facing giants, running for his life, and enduring hardship. But through it all, God was shaping him into the man who would lead a nation. What does this mean for you? It means you cannot judge your future by your present circumstances. God is working behind the scenes. He is aligning the right people, opening the right doors and closing the wrong ones. He is orchestrating events that you cannot see. Just because it's not happening on your timeline doesn't mean He's forgotten you. Delay does not mean denial. God's promises are still active even when you don't see movement. There are times when you may feel like giving up. The road seems too hard, the disappointments too heavy. But if you could see what God has planned for you, you wouldn't quit. If you knew the blessings that are waiting ahead, you would keep pressing forward. The enemy wants you to believe that your situation is permanent, that you've missed your chance, that things will never change. But God's plan is bigger than any mistake, bigger than any failure, bigger than any opposition. You must stop limiting yourself based on what you can see. You serve a limitless God. He does not operate by human rules. When He gives a promise, He fulfills it, even if it takes years. Abraham was promised a son, but he had to wait decades before it came to pass. What if he had given up? What if he had walked away from God's plan because it didn't happen on his schedule? Some of the greatest blessings require endurance. Life often feels like a series of twists and turns, a journey filled with uncertainties. At times you may find yourself in a season where nothing makes sense, where doors close unexpectedly, and where what you thought was a sure path suddenly disappears. In those moments it's easy to feel lost, to question whether you are moving in the right direction, or to wonder if God is truly guiding you. But the truth is, even when you cannot see the way, even when everything feels uncertain, God is still leading you. He is directing your steps in ways you may not yet understand. One of the biggest struggles we face as human beings is the desire for control. We want to know every detail, every step, and every outcome before we move forward. We want a clear map, a defined path, and a guarantee that things will work out exactly as we plan. But God does not always reveal the full picture. He leads us step by step, one moment at a time. He asks us to trust Him even when we don't understand. Look at the story of the Israelites. When God led them out of Egypt, He did not take them on the shortest route to the Promised Land. Instead, He took them on a longer journey through the wilderness. From a human perspective, this didn't make sense. Why not take the direct path? Why allow them to wander in the desert? But God knew something they didn't. He knew that if they faced war too soon, they would turn back. He knew that they needed to learn dependence on Him. Their journey was not about speed, it was about preparation. The same is true for you. Sometimes the path God takes you on will not be the one you expected. You may have planned for things to happen in a certain way, but instead, God redirects you. You may have thought a particular job, relationship, or opportunity was the right one, but suddenly it disappears. When that happens, it's easy to feel frustrated, to question why things didn't work out. But what if God was protecting you? What if He was leading you away from something that was never meant for you, and towards something far greater? God sees what you cannot see. He knows what lies ahead. He knows the dangers, the obstacles, and the hidden traps that could derail your destiny. That is why He sometimes closes doors. That is why He sometimes redirects your steps. What feels like a disappointment is often divine protection. What seems like a setback is actually a setup for something better. Think about Joseph. He had a dream that he would one day be a ruler. But his journey to that dream was not a straight path. He was sold into slavery, falsely accused and thrown into prison. At any point, Joseph could have thought that God had abandoned him. But in reality, God was leading him every step of the way. Every trial, every hardship, every detour was preparing him for his ultimate destiny. If Joseph had never been sold into slavery, he would not have ended up in Egypt. If he had never been falsely accused, he would not have been in prison at the right time to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And if he had never interpreted Pharaoh's dream, he would not have been elevated to a position of power. What seemed like random, painful events were actually divine steps toward his destiny. In your life, there will be moments where you don't understand why things are happening the way they are. You will face closed doors, unexpected delays, and challenges that test your faith. In those moments, you have a choice. You can resist, complain, and try to force your own way, or you can trust that God is leading you. You can believe that even in the confusion, even in the detours, even in the disappointments, His plan is still unfolding. Sometimes God leads you through situations that don't make sense because He is trying to build something inside of you. He is developing your faith, strengthening your character, and teaching you to rely on Him. If He showed you the entire journey in advance, you might try to skip the difficult parts. You might try to take shortcuts. But God knows that those difficult moments are necessary. They shape you, they prepare you, they transform you into the person who can handle the blessing He has prepared for you. When you look back on your life, you will see how God was leading you all along. The doors that closed were not rejections, they were redirections. The delays were not denials, they were opportunities for growth. The struggles were not pointless. They were the very things that equipped you for what's ahead. Right now, you may not see the full picture. You may not understand why certain things are happening. But trust that God is leading you. He is guiding your steps with purpose. He is aligning people, circumstances, and opportunities in ways that you cannot yet see. And when the time is right, everything will make sense. So instead of worrying about the future, instead of stressing about what you don't know, choose to trust. Choose to walk in faith. Choose to believe that even when the path is unclear, even when you feel like you're wandering, God is still in control. He has never failed you before, and He will not fail you now. His plan is unfolding, and in time you will see that every step, every twist, every turn was leading you exactly where you were meant to be.